Georgia is a southern state, and the history of slavery is still real here in Georgia. Race and class is permeated in everything that we do. Whether we say it or see it, it's there.
There is a long and a recent history of voter suppression in Georgia.
Long lines, not enough machines working, machines broken, you name it.
Millions of Georgians get purged from the voter rolls regularly.
Georgia Secretary of State and Republican gubernatorial candidate Brian Kemp has overseen the removal of more than 340,000 current Georgia residents from voting rolls.
There's a multiracial, multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, progressive majority in Georgia. But the impact of their vote choices has been neutralized or muted because of voter suppression. That's why the work of groups like the New Georgia Project, who register voters and do voter education year in and year out, is so important. People are dying. This work is necessary. This work has to happen. We have to win.
Record-breaking turnout in Georgia ahead of Election Day.
With 99% of the votes counted from the state of Georgia, and Joe Biden leads Donald Trump.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States.
When the race was finally and officially called for Vice President Biden, I felt sort of vindicated, not because of any particular candidate, but because we have been able to demonstrate that Georgia's multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual, progressive majority was real.
And so what we have now is a runoff.
All eyes are on Georgia, where two runoff races will determine the balance of power in the U.S. Senate.
January 5th, we'll have this Senate runoff election.
We had to celebrate, and then we had to reboot.
We're only going to continue to build on this momentum.
The work that Pro-Georgia and our partners are going to do over the next several weeks is the same work that we've done all year.
There is a tremendous coalition, mostly led by Black women, that support each other.
And that's a lot of people, and I'm not going to even do them all justice.
You have Deborah Scott with Georgia Stand Up,
And say Ufan from New Georgia Project.
Tamika Atkins with Pro-Georgia.
We have Helen Butler from the People's Agenda.
You've known Helen Butler. She's been out in these streets for decades.
I could go on. I'm going to miss somebody.
In this particular political moment, I do think that there's a narrative of celebrating and acknowledging the contributions of Black women. I think that they've always been around. There is a long history of radical resistance all across the state of Georgia. Georgia is, and particularly Atlanta, is known as the cradle of the civil rights movement. I think that it has been the uncredited labor of Black women that has gotten us to the point that we are at. And we think about the March on Washington, and there were no women that spoke that day, despite the fact the integral role that Black women organizers played in literally moving people from all across the country to get to Washington, D.C.
You can't think about the civil rights movement without saying Martin Luther King. But was Martin Luther King really the only one that worked in the civil rights movement? Absolutely not.
It doesn't mean that Black women were not organizing, were not contributing at all. It's uncredited, unacknowledged labor. There is a rigor with which we apply our organizing work. At the core of all of that is a rigorous research agenda. If we are lucky enough to make direct voter contact, we're going to make the most out of that interaction with well-researched messages that are designed to move people to action.
Thanks for what y'all are doing. Thanks, guys.
Have a good day.
Bye.
The way that we train our organizers is that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should be listening twice as much as we talk. And that talking to young people about what they care about, what their hopes and their fears are, what's at the top of their minds, and then connecting that to the act of voting. We've learned that talking about what our ancestors have done, that is not as effective as people think it is. Our data is showing that for voters under 40, the #1 issue that people voted on was racial justice across gender, across geography, and across race. People are seeing this racist violence that's happening in communities of color. They're seeing how our elected officials are responding. And I think it radicalized a lot of folks. When we're out at protesting, we're registering young people to vote, right? George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, pick a name. Instead of saying our ancestors died for the right to vote, we can say that in Glenn County, the jurors are picked from the list of registered voters. And that you're never gonna be able to be on the jury to bring justice for Ahmaud Arbery if you're not a registered voter. And it's much, much more effective than talking about Martin Luther King, with all due respect. Voters under 40 in Georgia, racial injustice, top of their minds. Now, when we zoom out and it's all Georgians, the number one issue was coronavirus. 250,000 Americans have died. 1 out of every 1,000 Black folks has died in this country due to COVID. It might be a little counterintuitive, but I believe that the pandemic actually had an animating impact and actually contributed to the increase in turnout that we saw. There's no one like Black folks and people of color and young people in Georgia that know how important it is to have elected officials who won't cut your health care in the middle of a pandemic.
This has been the year that changed everything in America and in the world.
We shut down all 7 of our offices on March 9th. Our goals had not changed, but the tactics needed to.
We are in the middle of a pandemic, and so we recognize we don't want to put anyone at risk.
After careful consideration, we got a deep consultation with some public health experts, redesigned our program, reconfigured sort of our goals for how we trained our canvassers.
We're going back out in the street. We're going to do safe distancing. We wear our mask. We are leaving information at the door so they can make their choices.
The main focus is safety. We're just going to place these probably in the side of the door or on the door handle and then keep it moving. Use your canvassing, we knock at the door and ask the person if they vote, and we let them know there's an election. It's more person-to-person contact. You get more gratification when you talk to a person, educating them about the reason for elections, the reason to vote.
That led to us having to evaluate how do we communicate and how do we touch the people that we care about. So we started with our first phone bank, just calling around the state and checking in with people to see how they were doing. So our first call wasn't even about the politics, it was about how they are, because people needed to know that there were organizations that cared about them. And then we started talking about what does this election mean to you and why would they vote. After being in the House for so long, they actually were not hanging up on us. They were actually glad that we called.
So it's just about talking with the people, communicating with the people, understanding what they're saying, and then give them some positive feedback. We have more young people that come out to vote this year than ever before in the history of the United States, and we like to think that we had a little something to do with it.
We're an intergenerational organization, so we have a lot of young people around us. We had to teach how to put together a campaign and why you do certain things, because we want to make sure we have a generation of organizers that are ready for the future.
One of our sort of outreach tactics to Gen Zers and millennials has been thinking about gaming. 50% of gamers identify as women and femmes. 80% of Black men and boys identify as gamers. We have this activation called Twitch the Vote. We brought on some of the most popular esports players across the country. We had Beyonce's mom, just to lean in and talk about the power of the youth vote in this moment.
The usual stereotypes about, how the young folks, how kind of more apathetic those segments are. We've seen that that's not the case this year.
And it went really well. We registered 9,000 people to vote on one day. So it was like, well, there might be something to this.
Early voting starts December 14th. We want people to vote from December 14th on, so that January 5th is just about putting a couple of more votes in that box.
We are staffing up now. We're gonna knock on 1 million doors over the next 7 weeks.
I think that we'll see higher turnout than we usually have for runoff.
Your experiments, your results ain't shit if you can't replicate them. And the idea that we can continue to replicate, that we can continue to prove our theory of change and show folks how to win in the Deep South felt very, very good. That the folks that we are building community with in Mississippi, in Alabama, in Tennessee, in Texas, have seen what we are building, that they know that it is possible.